Hey ladies, this episode is brought to you by my intuitive eating group coaching program, One Bite at a Time. If you desire to stop stressing and obsessing over everything that you eat, if you really want to trust your body around food and overcome the focus that you've been putting on your weight and your body, and really if you want to learn how to cope without overeating and binge eating, this group coaching program is for you. You can learn more and get on the waitlist now for the fall 2022 group at healthcoachforlife.com/group coaching. Why get on the waitlist? Well, the bonuses this year are amazing. They include a coupon code to save off enrollment, 2 bonus teachings, and while spots are available, 2 private coaching calls with me. So to get on the waitlist now, head to healthcoach4life.com/group coaching, or you can click the link in the show notes wherever you are listening. Welcome to the Health, Life, and More for Women podcast. This is a podcast for women who are ready to ditch diets, ditch the scale, and food guilt forever, and instead invite peace with food, body trust, and confidence in all of your choices. This show will shed some light on sneaky ways diet culture has infiltrated your thoughts, your family, and your well-being. I believe that no matter the episode, you'll walk away feeling informed, inspired, and encouraged. I'm your host, Jennifer D'Amato. I'm a certified intuitive eating counselor, coach, a mom of 4 daughters, a lover of all things pink, and I can't wait to dive into each and every episode with you. Let's dive in now. Ladies, we have made it to the 6th principle of intuitive eating. Now, don't stress. If you've just discovered this podcast, you absolutely can hop around each of the principles in any order that you like. If you do want to start at the beginning, you can listen to episode 133, which is titled, What is and is Not Intuitive Eating. That is really the episode that not only kicked off this series, but it also is the first pages of the podcast workbook for this series. You can purchase that at any time you're listening and download all of the released episode pages. If you are listening in real time, that right now is over 20 deep dive questions that accompany each of the principal episodes. The link is in the show notes for you. But this episode is dedicated to discovering, or maybe even for you, it's rediscovering the satisfaction factor. Satisfaction, or being satisfied with what you eat, is different from what we talked about in episode 138, which was feeling the physical sensation of fullness. I would describe satisfaction as also pleasure and enjoyment from the food or what we're eating. Dieting and disordered eating have really done a fantastic job of removing pleasure from the eating experience. Heck, they have even removed the eating experience. Have you ever heard that phrase, or maybe you've even used that phrase, food is fuel? Y'all, I am cringing at how many times I personally used that phrase. What ends up happening is we reduce food to only being a biological need. Food is more than fuel. I know I'm upsetting all of the wellness culture people. I am upsetting all of the people using this for marketing. Pleasure and satisfaction can and should be a part of eating. When we remove pleasure and satisfaction from food, we are going to find a way to get it. You might have experienced this yourself if you've eaten all the diet foods, you've stayed within your points, you've tracked all your calories, you feel like you've been so good, you saw the air quotes happen there, and then you feel out of control around something that is pleasurable. Maybe it's something sweet for you. Maybe it's something crunchy for you. Maybe it's when you go out and you feel almost out of control because your body, your brain is seeking the pleasure and satisfaction that can and should come from what we're eating. I hear from clients all the time when they say, oh gosh, Jen, I was really full. I feel like I ate everything and I still didn't feel satisfied. This is what happens when we have removed all pleasure, all satisfaction from what we eat because, we believe that food is only fuel or that food is only to really satisfy that biological need of hunger. What if food was both? What if food was for necessity, that energy that we need to exist, to survive, to live? And what if food was also for pleasure? Unfortunately, this is where we get stuck because we live in this culture, and I'm talking about like globally, but also the influence of diet culture, right? That if you're getting pleasure, right, if we're thoroughly satisfied, we've attached guilt to enjoying food. If it's so good, right? If we're indulging, even that word sometimes it's so can be triggering because these kind of foods, the ones that give us full satisfaction and pleasure, we now, because of years of dieting, have associated those with feeling guilty. You feel like you're doing something wrong. You feel like even thinking about these foods is wrong. So think about what that's created in your thought process. These foods that you find pleasure in and high satisfaction levels that you feel like are a indulgence are really fostering this negative relationship with food. And hear me out on this. It's partly because of the thoughts, but it's partly because you're actually acting on that. You'll sacrifice somewhere else. You'll cut back on eating. You'll limit what you're having just so you can have the pleasurable food later. This is why I tell you macro counting is absolutely a diet. Playing with those numbers, which really is still, it's like a fancy calorie counting. It's playing with those numbers. They tell you, this was me. This was my disordered eating going into hyperdrive. You can eat anything. Nothing's off limits, except you will have to manipulate what you're eating to have the anything, to have the satisfying, pleasurable foods. I'm going to eat less now so I can go out to eat. I'm going to eat less of this so I can, have dessert with my friends. I mean, you don't even have to be macro counting or calorie counting to have this thought process. This is not how our bodies were created. Intuitively, we actually seek pleasure. We seek satisfaction. I love how the authors of Intuitive Eating acknowledge that the center, the core of intuitive eating is satisfaction. That if you put it at the center of all the other principles, they would come around this idea of being satisfied. Now, we've only gone through some of the principles so far in this particular series, but if you think about each principle and how it relates to satisfaction, it actually might blow your mind too. So think about hunger. If you eat when you're, just moderately hungry, signs and signals are going off, you're noticing hunger, so you honor that rather than, putting it off, getting ravenous, hangry, grumpy. You're probably, I would almost guarantee, but I'll just say probably going to be even more satisfied when you eat. If you've ever eaten something after being, so hungry that you're like lightheaded, dizzy, I've heard this from my clients. They've said, I've eaten to satisfy that hunger, but I still don't feel satisfied. If you eat without a diet mentality, that was principle 1 that we talked about. Talk about feeling satisfied. You don't have all of these rules and regulations and this stuff weighing you down about what you're eating when you're eating. Think about satisfaction when it comes to having peace with food. And if you're challenging the food police and they really maybe don't even exist in your presence anymore, it really is a lot more satisfying when you feel connected to the signals of your body, when you honor those. We haven't talked about respect for our body, moving our body, or gentle nutrition. but they will have that same center of satisfaction attached to them. And I actually believe that this center of satisfaction spreads out beyond intuitive eating. When we're acknowledging the need for pleasure and satisfaction in our eating experience, we can even invite that in beyond the eating experience. I have this happen with clients all the time where they're like, they've really been pressing into intuitive eating. We've been working together for a while. They start wanting that feeling, that peace, that body trust in other places of their life. So, when was the last time you asked yourself, what do I really want to eat? I'm curious, how often do you ask yourself this question? Now, I totally understand how difficult this question can be and how foreign it might feel if you've never been even asked about what you like to eat. You've never explored this. I know for some it might feel like the first time. You might even get really curious about what was the eating experience of asking, what do I like to eat for you in your childhood? Was there a strong diet mentality in your home? And a lot of things about food were dictated to you. Was there a lot of morality of food, the good and bad going on? Was there messaging about foods that were pleasurable and satisfying, that those really had a negative messaging to that, this is indulging, this is too much, you need to limit? You can even start there to explore, what is my story when it comes to seeking pleasure and satisfaction with food? So I do think that's the best starting point for you. If you're just starting to explore this simple question, what do I want to eat? What sounds really good? I've had clients start at this place as well. And, they start asking the question, getting curious, and then plan their grocery shopping, maybe some meals. We don't usually do big meal planning, week-long meals. Doesn't really work, especially a lot of my clients have been obsessively tracking their food. So that feels like too much. But we take smaller chunks of time, maybe 3 days, maybe 4, and they start exploring, what is it I want? What sounds really good this week? And plan their, grocery shopping and meals accordingly. Some things to consider would be your 5 senses. Consider what flavors, what textures, what aromas, what sounds appealing to you right now. So after considering that, making your plan, having that food, you have it all in the home. Maybe you are even dedicating some meals that you're really going to make something new, something you haven't had in a while. One of the greatest things you can do to honor all this effort, all this thought that you've put into it, is to really enjoy the food, to sit down and be mindful with what's in front of you. I always say it's like a way for me to honor myself, right? My time, my energy, my planning, my shopping, all the things that go into that food being on the table, right? The work that I do, the money that I earn, like everything's there. So what if I just give it the time and attention to be grateful that I have food on the table and slow down? I remove distractions as best I can and just enjoy every bite. Do you remember a food or a meal when you were a kid, like every single bite was the best thing you'd ever had? I can tell you I have that meal, and I'm going to share it with you because I have it every single year on my birthday. That's how much this means to me. Now, I've had it outside of my birthday as well, but I always have this same meal for my birthday. My mom makes it for me. Shout out to my mom. She still makes me shake and bake chicken leg quarters, mashed potatoes, butternut squash, and green beans. Every single bite of this meal is like happiness and joy in my mouth. Every texture, the crunch from the skin, the juiciness of the chicken, the sweetness of butternut squash. I'm so glad my birthday's in the fall because butternut squash is just best in the fall. Mashed potatoes with butter. And listen, I'm fine with my mashed potatoes being a little lumpy, but sometimes my mom will like whip them. Y'all, let me tell you, amazing. And green beans, she roasts them, puts a little salt. Yes, please. I love her. It's love her it. I do love her it. It is so savory. It's so wonderful. I'm not saying I show up for every meal like I do this one, but even a part of that experience, that gratitude, that joy shows up for me throughout the week when I have a meal in front of me. Necessity and pleasure with food can coexist. We live in such a hustle culture that the eating experience itself, sitting down to have this meal, can feel so rushed. It can feel even chaotic. And I do want to encourage you that not every meal needs to be, mindful and savoring every bite. Not every meal is going to be, noticing all the flavors and having no distractions around you in a beautiful table setting. But what if once a week you invited this? Maybe it's once or twice a week you just had the meal experience where you sat down, enjoyed the fruits of your labor, all that you put into getting this meal on the table, and enjoyed every bite. I will tell you, I don't eat foods that I don't enjoy anymore. Now, not everything is, shake and bake chicken and butternut squash, but everything I eat brings satisfaction. Sometimes the satisfaction is from honoring my hunger, feeling my fullness, knowing like this was just what my body needed. But most of the time, the satisfaction is truly, coming into that eating experience and eating foods I genuinely enjoy that bring satisfaction, that are pleasurable to eat. You've heard me say it, throughout this entire series that intuitive eating is a mind-body experience. And I think we see this so well when it comes to satisfaction. It really does allow you, the freedom to pick just the right foods for your taste buds, to make sure that the food hits the spot for you. It's part of the reason too I say this work is individual, because I'm going to tell you right now, if my husband and I are sitting at the same table and we're talking about the most pleasurable, satisfying, meal experience and foods, he probably has like something fermented in sauerkraut, mustard, pickles, those things. And I am sick to my stomach even thinking about those foods. When I order like a burger and, most places have pickles, I'm like, don't put the pickle anywhere even near my plate, like the smell, everything. But for him, he finds satisfaction and joy in what he's eating. As someone who ate rice cakes on the regular, my disordered eating days took almost all pleasure and satisfaction out of food for me. You really can start to feel even disconnected from seeking pleasure and satisfaction. So it really is important to start exploring it, asking yourself, maybe even for you, it's trying foods. Maybe you want to go to those fermented foods and you want try the sauerkraut and the pickle because you haven't. And maybe you find joy and satisfaction in those. But maybe you're like me and you're like, no, I want that shake and bake chicken, mashed potatoes, and some squash and green beans. So just as it's important to honor our hunger and feel into our fullness, I believe it's equally, if not more important, to discover what is satisfying and pleasurable to you. Now, I'll tell you in the workbook pages, there's going to be some deep dives on these points that I've brought up here on the podcast. So if you haven't grabbed that yet and you want to, just head into the show notes, click podcast workbook, and you'll have access not only to the deep dive questions, the notes section, and of course the key points from this episode, but all of the previous episodes. And you'll have access to all the upcoming episodes as well. If you haven't grabbed that yet, you might want to, because next week we're talking about one of the most popular principles that I address and people ask me questions about, which is coping with our emotions with kindness, which really what people are asking about is emotional eating. How do I handle emotional eating? That's next week's episode, but here's to you finding great satisfaction in what you're eating this week. All right, until next week, ladies.